whole town swore the new girl was sweet on Eli. You couldn't fault them for the guess. Eli Tate was young and hard to look away from, and he had grown rich off wolf blood besides. And the girl, Wren, was a stranger who kept finding reasons to ride out the timber road to the Tate place at the edge of the trees. So the town did its arithmetic, the way a town will, and felt sure of the sum. They had it wrong. She wasn't watching Eli. She was watching the old man. It started the first morning she rode in, before anyone had a name to hang on her. A big sorrel gelding broke its tie in front of the mercantile and put a teamster up against the wall. Ears flat, eyes gone white all the way around, hooves coming off the dirt. Grown men climbed up onto the boardwalk to be out of the way of it, and one old man crossed the street toward the trouble instead of away from it. He went slow. He kept his hands low and open, and he said something nobody close enough to hear could later quite repeat. Only that it was low and even, and pitched the way you'd speak to a child waking out of a bad dream. He did not hurry. He did not flinch. And in a little while that 1,000 pounds of frightened animal stood with his head dropped against his chest, blowing soft, and the whole street let out the breath it had been holding right along with it. His name was Amos Tate. He was near 60, gray coming in at the temple, and the county thought of him about the way it thought of a good tool that did its job. They brought him their ruined horses, the biters and the bolters, the ones beaten until they trusted nothing, and he made them gentle again, and they paid him fair and forgot him by supper. He lived alone where the good grass gave way to timber and stone. When a man tried to shake his hand over a colt he'd mended, Amos would touch the brim of his hat and look at the horse instead, as if the praise belonged to someone else. The women on the mercantile porch had Wren married off to young Eli before she'd finished tying her mare. It was the natural story, the handsome one, the rich one, the one with a future to him. Not one of them thought to ask why a girl bound for a young man kept reining up every dusk at the old man's gate. Twice a week, Eli Tate drove his wagon down into Stagewood stacked high with wolf hides, stiff and pale and dark at the edges where the blood had dried, and came out of the bank with more money than those wolves had ever cost a living calf. That was the thing nobody in town quite looked at straight. There was a fortune being made up in the high country, clearing it of wolves, and somebody with deep pockets was paying for every hide. In the small ranchers, the ones with a quarter section and a mortgage and no friend at the bank, had begun to feel a wind they couldn't put a name to. The kind of wind that comes ahead of the weather a country remembers for 40 years. At dusk, Amos sat on his porch with a fiddle across his knee and played. Not for anyone. The way another man might whistle walking home. And Wren came and stood at the rail of his gate in the falling light, and listened and watched his hands. There was a thing he wore on a cord at his throat, a single wolf's tooth, yellowed with age, worn smooth as a river stone by a thumb that had turned it over more times than a priest turns a rosary. She watched that too. She was no girl mooning at a window. Look close and you'd have seen it. The stillness of her, the way her eyes went over the place, and the man and the tooth at his throat and added them all up to something. She was a woman taking the measure of a lock she meant to break. And that same night, up in the dark timber that Eli Tate called his own, his traps came up empty again, sprung clean, the wolves gone back into the trees. Someone had been loosing them for weeks, and Eli meant to learn who. If you believe a man's worth was never meant to be measured in his years, tell me in the comments what town you're listening from tonight. I like to know where the folks who hold to that are sitting. And subscribe so the next story down this road can find its way to you. To understand the old man, you had to understand the boy. And to understand the boy, you had to ride up past the good grass into the high timber, where Eli Tate kept his outfit. It was a hard place, and it had been made hard on purpose. Wolf hides stretched on frames to dry, row upon row, pale and stiff in the morning light. Steel traps hung from the trees by the dozen, oiled and patient. There was more money in a dead wolf that year than in a living calf, and Eli took every dollar of it. He did not whistle while he worked. He did not seem to take any pleasure in it at all. He took the hides and the money and went looking for more, like a man paying down a debt that never came due. That morning, Eli crouched at a trap that had been sprung in the night and read the ground the way some men read scripture. Someone had been springing his traps and turning his wolves loose. Weeks of it now, and he meant to know who. There was a boot print in the soft mud at the trap's edge. Small, narrow, not a man's boot at all. He said nothing, but something went still and careful in his face, and he stayed crouched over that one small print a long moment before he rose and walked away without a word to anyone. Down the ridge where the timber thinned, the old man had stopped his horse and was watching the camp from a distance. The way he watched everything, slow, giving nothing away. It was a hard thing for Amos Tate to look at, because he had carried that boy out of these very woods. The wolf's tooth at his throat had come from this timber too. Years back, in a winter so cruel that folks still measured other winters against it, the wolves had come down out of the high country, starving. They took a whole homestead family, all but one child, a boy of 8, found 3 days after, half frozen and gone wild with what he'd seen. No words left in him, only teeth and terror. Amos had drawn the tooth from the throat of the wolf that would have finished him, and he had kept it every day since, not as a trophy of a thing he'd killed, as a promise that the killing had cost enough. That it stopped here with him. He had carried the boy home and raised him into a man, and the town that watched them grow never once doubted they were father and son. They shared a name and a silence and a place at the edge of the timber, and that was enough for the town's arithmetic. But Eli was no blood of his. Amos had tried to raise a rancher. Instead, he had raised an axe, and he had tried more than once to turn the boy from it. The last time Eli had gone cold and quiet and told him plain, defend the wolves again, say one more word for them, and he would leave Stagewood and never come back. So Amos had kept his silence after that. Being right was a thing a man could live without. The boy near enough to watch over was not. A man learns which loss he can carry and which he can't. And in all the years between, Eli had never once asked who it was that paid his bounty so handsomely. A man who does not want the answer learns soon enough to stop asking the question. That night the traps were sprung again. The wolves went free into the dark, and Amos, who knew better than anyone living what his boy would do to whoever he caught at it, took his coat down from the peg and rode up alone into the timber to find the ghost first. The timber at night was no place for a stranger. The ground was a riddle of root and stone and old gray snow, and a body who didn't know it could walk in circles until the sun came up and never know they'd been lost. But Amos had been a boy in these woods and an old man in them both. He did not walk in circles. He went straight to the trap line, and he stood still as a stump, and he let the dark tell him where the ghost was. He heard it before he saw it, the hard iron snap of a trap's jaws thrown open, the soft, grateful rush of a freed wolf melting back into the trees. Then he stepped out of the dark and was simply there, 3 feet off, before the ghost ever knew the dark had held anyone else at all. It was the new girl, Wren. She did not scream, and she did not run. That was the first thing he marked about her, and he marked it the way he'd mark a horse that didn't shy at a gunshot, as something rare and worth a second look. She stood with her hands quiet at her sides and looked at him, taking his measure the way she'd taken it from his gate every evening for a week. And in one fist, half folded into her skirt, was a square of paper. "You'll get yourself killed up here," he said. It was not a threat. It was the plain fact of it, said Plain. "I know what I'm doing," she said. He held out his hand for the paper. After a moment, she gave it over, because there was no lie she could have told that those quiet eyes wouldn't have seen the bottom of. It was a page torn out of a tally book, a long column of figures, and beside the figures, names. Who had been paid? Who had done the paying? And for what? She had not climbed up here to loose his wolves out of pity, though she had done that too. Every night for weeks. She had come to steal proof. By every right he owned, he should have called for Eli. They were Eli's woods, Eli's traps, Eli's wolves she'd been turning loose. But Amos had spent a lifetime reading frightened things, and he read her now, the set of her jaw, the steadiness of those hands, the way she had staked her whole self on whatever this was, and he stood there a long moment in the dark and found that he could not do it. So he did a thing he could not afterward have explained to a living soul. He scuffed her boot prints out of the mud with the side of his own boot. He told her which dry draw to ride down so the trackers wouldn't cut her trail in the morning. He sent the ghost safe back into the dark. Up the ridge, a lantern swung. Eli had come to see who was at his traps. And through the black trees, he saw the old man standing alone, where a thief ought to have been. Saw him lift a hand to someone already riding off into the dark and say not one word of it after. Eli did not understand what he was looking at, but he was a man who forgot nothing, and he folded it away, cold with all the other things he had never understood about the old man who had raised him. Wren paused at her stirrup before she went. She looked back at him a moment as though she meant to ask him why, and then thought the better of it and rode. The page she had left in his hand named a man whose name had no business on a wolfer's ledger. A man who already owned more cattle than he had grass to put them on. A cattle baron down in the flat country to the south called Cyrus Drummond. Cyrus Drummond came up to Stagewood himself that week in a coat that had cost more than most men in the county would see in a year. He was a big, smooth, well-fed man, and he was badly out of his place, and he did not appear to know it. He wore the wrong boots for the mud and frowned at the country as though it owed him an apology for being what it was. He owned half the territory's beef already, and he had come up to look over the other half's grass. The town, God help it, fussed over him as if he were good weather they'd prayed a long time for. But the page in Amos's pocket told the rest of it. Drummond was the man paying Eli to kill the wolves, and killing wolves was never what Drummond had truly been after. Here is the plain shape of the thing. Drummond did not pay good money for dead wolves. He paid his men to empty the high range, the wolves first, to make it look like honest work, and then the people, the small ranchers, the ones who would break, frighten them, burn them out, buy their land for pennies when they ran, clear the grass of every living thing that stood on it, and turn his own cattle onto the empty country once the dust had settled. Eli had been swinging the axe a whole year and calling it justice the whole time. They learned how true it was the same night. There was an old rancher down the draw who had kept his own copy of that tally, a careful, frightened man with the proof of it hidden in his cabin. He had run for the county seat days before and left word where a friend might find it. Amos and Wren were both inside, bent over the loose hearthstone where the old rancher's ledger lay hidden when they heard the horses come. Drummond's men did not knock, and they did not stop to see who was home. They dropped a bar across the door from the outside to hold whoever was in their inn, and they put their torches to the dry shakes of the roof and rode off without once getting down from the saddle. The little house went up fast. Amos got Wren down low to the floor, where the good air still lay, the ledger crushed to her chest. He put his own back to the worst of the heat and his shoulder to the shuttered window, and he pushed until the old wood broke. They fell out together into the cold grass, coughing, scorched, alive. Behind them, the cabin stood up in one roaring column of fire that lit the whole draw orange. The men were long gone. Their work, as they reckoned it, was done. She stood in the cold with the heat of it on her face and told Amos the last of what she was. That high range had been her father's once. Drummond had taken it the slow way, the legal way, the patient way, by paper and by debt, and her family along with it, and left her nothing in the world but a name and a reason. She had not come to Stagewood for a young man, nor even, in the beginning, for an old one. She had come to take her country back. The proof could only stop Drummond in the law's hands. The marshals, a hard day's ride to the south. And Drummond knew now that she had it. Amos did not ask her whether she wanted the company. He went out to the corral and saddled 2 horses. The road down was long, and every mile of it was watched. They rode out before the moon, and they did not ride fast because Amos would not run a country he could read. He knew where the road would be watched, and he stayed off it. He knew which trails held water and which held men. The girl rode well and complained of nothing, and more than once he caught himself watching the easy way she sat a horse and made himself look back at the country instead, as a man does when he's caught himself reaching for a thing that isn't his to want. Drummond's trackers found them at the river. There was a ford where any sensible traveler would cross, and the men were waiting on the far side of it, spread out in the willows where the trail came up the bank. A younger man, a bolder one, would have tried to shoot his way over and died in the brown water doing it. Amos did not. He sat his horse at the edge of the fast river and read the morning sky upstream, where the light was the color of a bad bruise. And he knew a thing the men in the willows did not. The rain that had already fallen in the high country was coming down the canyon, and the ford had maybe a quarter hour left before it was no ford at all. He took Wren over hard and fast at the last shallow place above the crossing, the horses lunging chest deep, and they came up the near bank, soaked to the waist just as the river stood up behind them. The flood came down brown and roaring and took the ford and the willows and the trail on the far side, all of it at once. And Drummond's men sat their horses on the wrong side of a river that no longer had a bottom and could do nothing in the world but watch the 2 of them ride on. Wisdom had beaten youth, and not a single shot had been fired. But in the hard lunge across, a snag of driftwood had opened a long gash down the old man's side. He had said nothing of it. He had pressed his arm against it and ridden on, because he had had a lifetime's practice at carrying a hurt where no one could see it. By dusk, the cold and the slow loss of blood had begun their work on him. His hands were not quite so steady on the reins as they had been at dawn, and there was a hard day still lying between them and the marshal. Ahead, where the road bent toward the south, the windows of a way station threw a small square of yellow light out into the dark. The way station was a low road ranch where the stage changed its horses, and there were men drinking in the front room when the 2 of them came in out of the cold. 2 of Drummond's trackers were among them. They had come around the flood by the long way and were warming their hands and watching the door. The host, a broad woman with a quick and sorting eye, looked the travelers over. An old man, a young woman, the one horse blanket between them, and opened her mouth to ask the question that would have set the whole room listening. Wren answered it before it was asked. She took Amos's arm and called him husband, easy as drawing breath, and asked the woman, please, for their room. Her man was tired, and the road had been long, and the hard face softened, and the woman showed them up the stair, and the trackers went back to their cups, and the dangerous moment passed by like weather. The lie sat easier on the both of them than either had any business letting it. She went back down once for hot water for the wound, and she took her time at the kitchen hearth, because 2 of Drummond's trackers were still there, talking low over their cups, and a careful woman listens. By noon the next day they were saying the high range would be Drummond's. He had paper on it and a hearing before the marshal, and once the seal came down at midday, the thing was done, signed, sealed, and past any man's undoing. She carried that knowledge back up the stairs colder than the water had any right to make her. Upstairs, by the light of a single lamp, She saw the dark stain spread down his shirt, and there was no more hiding it from her. She made him sit. She heated water and threaded a needle from the small kit in her saddlebag, and she set to closing the gash down his side with the same steady hands that had worked his boy's traps in the dark. And she did not let them shake, though the wound was an ugly one, and the man was old, and she had ridden a long, frightened way at his shoulder to get here. "You ought to be doing this for a younger man," he said. He was looking at the lamp, at the wall, at anything but her. "One who could give you back the years for it." She did not stop her stitching, and she did not look up. "Hold still," she said. "I've made my choice. You'll not unmake it for me." He had no answer for that. He had never in his life had an answer for a thing he wanted and did not believe he had the right to keep. When it was done and bound clean, he reached up and lifted the wolf's tooth from the cord at his throat. The promise he had carried better than half his life, that he had never once put into another living hand. And he set it in her palm and folded her fingers closed over it. "Hold that for me," was all he said. But she knew well enough what it cost him, and she held it like the thing it was. He still would not say the word, but he did not move away from her either, and in a man like that, that was its own kind of answer. They rode out at first light, hard, south for the marshal's town, because the proof in Wren's coat would only matter if it got there in time. And time was the one country Amos Tate had never learned to read. It was a simple, ugly thing that Drummond had done, and they had it now from his own men's mouths, overheard in the dark of the way station. Drummond held paper on the high range, debts he had built out of fear and fire and a crooked tally. And at noon that day, he meant to stand before the marshal, call those debts due, and take the land for good. Once the marshal's seal came down at noon, no truth on God's earth would lift it again. The book in Wren's coat was the one thing that could prove him a thief before the seal fell. And it was an hour's hard ride to town, and the morning was already half spent. So they ran. They came down out of the last of the timber at a gallop, the marshal's town in sight on the flat below. And a rider swung his horse broadside across the road to block it, a rifle up at his shoulder. It was Eli. He had no business being ahead of them. Not after the morning they ridden, but he had come down the Wolfer's cutback, a near vertical slide of loose stone and broken rock that no sane man would ride a horse down, the kind of trail only a man who'd spent his life chasing wolves would know, or dare. Drummond's men had told him only that the ghost who'd been loosing his wolves was riding south, and he had come to end it, knowing nothing of fires or foreclosures, knowing only that someone had been taking from him the one thing he had ever built. 10 years of blood and wolf iron came down to a single bend in the road, and an old man holding out his empty hand. "Eli," Amos said. He did not reach for a gun. He had not carried one up that road. He only walked his horse forward, slow, the way he'd once walked toward a panicked gelding in a Stagewood street, the way he had walked a lifetime before toward a half-frozen boy gone wild in the timber. And he told him the truth, quick and plain and small enough to carry, whose money had always paid him, what the bounties had really been buying, whose men had lit the fires. The one thing the boy had spent a whole year deciding never to ask. For a long moment, Eli did not move at all. Then he lowered the rifle. Up the rocks above the road, a gray shape broke and ran. A wolf, the kind he'd have shot a week ago without a second thought, and crossed the high ground and was gone into the country, and Eli watched it go and did not raise the gun. And Wren rode up beside him and pressed the wolf's tooth, the old man's whole long promise, into his hand, and his fist closed over it. The war he had been fighting since he was 8 years old and had never had a word for was over. "Ride," he said low. "I'll hold the road behind you." They reached the marshal's office with the noon light coming hard and flat through the windows, and laid the true book down on the desk before ever a seal touched Drummond's paper. The fires, the fraud, the names, the whole patient cruelty of it, set out plain for the law to read. And that was the end of Cyrus Drummond, not with a shot, with a column of figures, and the truth arriving with a minute to spare. He was undone by the very law he had meant to win with, and he left the country as small as, underneath all that fine cloth, he had always been. The land was safe, and the harvest social was only a week off. At dusk, the old man sat on his porch with the fiddle across his knee, and he did not play it. By the door, where it had never hung before, a single wolf's tooth turned slowly on its cord in the evening wind. The boy had hung it there himself before he rode out, and had said nothing about it, because the saying would have been too much for him, and the doing of it was enough. Wren came up the steps and sat down beside him. "You're too young for an old rancher, Wren," he said, looking out at the darkening country, and he made his mouth go up at the corner like it was a joke. "Always were." She leaned in close so that the words went to him and to no one else in all that quiet country. "To me," she said, "you're perfect." And this time he did not step back. The man who could find the good in every broken thing the country ever carried to his gate, and never once in himself, sat still on his own porch in the last of the light. And he let himself, at the long end of it, be chosen. They settled it there, the two of them, before anyone else came up the road, in the plain, unhurried way that two people settle a thing they have both known a while. They would be married at the harvest social, down in Stagewood, in front of the whole town that had been so very sure it knew her story. The town would see at last which man the new girl had been riding out to see all along. And that was the thing the whole town had got wrong, and the thing she had known from the first evening she stood at his gate, that a man's worth was never once in his years. If this one rode with you tonight, tell me so in the comments and stay close. There is another story down this road, and it is already waiting for the evening you come back.